Welcome back to our module on stereotype threat and computing education. In this segment, we're going to discuss three relatively separate ideas that impact stereotype threat. Each of them could deserve an entire module in their own right, but we're just going to give a high-level overview of each. And the first one is classroom culture. One of the most common disappointing statements I hear when I'm interacting with educators about diversity is they say, "I treat everyone the same." And what this typically means is I treat everyone like I treat people like me. I treat everyone as if they were like myself. It is treating everyone the same, but it does not mean you're making everyone equally comfortable. So for example, let's consider what happens when you tell a joke. I'm a fan of humor in my classes, and when I tell a joke, some people laugh and some people don't. Some people get the joke and some don't. The people that get the joke are happy. They enjoy the humor. They feel like they belong. It's a positive experience. But the people that don't get the joke, when I talk to them afterwards, in general, the majority will say, it must have been a bad joke. I'm like the teacher told a joke, I didn't get it, it was a bad joke. But the minority tend to say instead there's a sense of lack of belonging. Other people are laughing around me. I'm not laughing. I am not like them. This is probably why I have this lack of belonging. There are many ways this can show up in how you decorate your classroom. It can show up in the vocabulary you use, how you dress, many, many things, the examples you choose, right? Do you have posters of video game characters that only certain groups of students will understand? What is it about your environment that keys your culture more than their culture and can make them feel like they don't belong, even if it is, in the literal sense, equitable? Now, you may believe a stereotype. In general, when I'm talking to people about stereotype threat and diversity, I assume that they don't believe the negative stereotypes. But maybe you do. So I remind you again of this idea of the cognitive personal trainer we mentioned a little bit in the previous segment, right? Your job as a personal trainer is to help everyone. Even the small, frail minds, you want them to become as strong as you can. You're not a talent scout. That's not your job. Your job is a personal trainer. And telling somebody that comes to you, you have a small brain, you will do poorly, or thinking that yourself can impede your ability to give them a proper education. Also, stereotype threat is based on awareness. So reduce that by not raising awareness. That will help them even if you believe the stereotype. Right? So if you can avoid using gender-laden pronouns in how you're discussing things, then this can cause people not to think about gender as much and reduce stereotype threat, independent of your personal beliefs about anything about what was going wrong. Also, I would ask you, if something is true, why is it true, right? If the stereotype pans out in reality, well, we've got stereotype threat, and we've got various kinds of biases and different opportunities, and so many reasons why our observations might agree with a stereotype other than a lack of ability. And as we can reduce those things, we can reduce the stereotypes and see that they are, as I believe they truly are, false. The third thing to understand is the idea of unacknowledged prerequisites. Fields tend to assume some knowledge, right? When I write the prerequisites for my courses in our course catalog, I never bother mentioning the ability to speak English, even though without that ability, our students will not succeed in my class. There are other things, though, that we tend to not to acknowledge or even recognize, and one of the larger ones in CS is this idea of spatial reasoning, the ability to manipulate shapes in your head. This is surprisingly useful for learning CS. Nothing in computing, or very little in computing, has any direct spatial character. Everything lives on a little chip the size of your fingernail, and only voltages move, and there's no real sense of space or position. But we teach CS with a high degree of spatial vocabulary and analogy. We talk about stacks, and trees, and addresses, and pointers, and things being nested inside of other things and variables as if they were boxes, and on and on and on. We have this highly spatial vocabulary and teaching practice, which causes people to have a strongly developed level of spatial reasoning to more rapidly understand the analogies we are using to teach without needing additional conscious thought, and thus learn faster. And spatial reasoning, as it turns out, is largely learned, because we very rarely teach it in most schools. It's instead typically learned through play. Two of the most common ways of learning it through play is through first-person shooter video games, which tend to have this maze-like environment, and construction toys. And as you think about the various stereotypes in our field, most of them are either associated with demographics that are stereotypically drawn towards video games, and for the first-person shooter variety, or they're associated with socioeconomic status, which is characteristic of being able to afford and play with construction toys. And so we'll see this missing prerequisite, this additional information that we may be withholding from some of our students because we didn't even know they needed it, may also be exacerbating stereotypes and causing us to see them in the wild. There's a lot more to say about spatial reasoning, and although at the time of recording we do not yet have a module on that, we hope to add one so that you can better understand how to address this and other problems. Just because you see a stereotype being true in your experience does not mean that some of your students lack ability. They may just lack the opportunity or the ability to have learned the prerequisites, or the chance to have learned the prerequisites that allow them to succeed.